Indiana Disability History Project, Center on Aging and Community, Indiana Institute on Disability and Community, Indiana University.
Your name is?
My name's Jim Hammond. I've spent 34 years with the Indiana Association of Rehabilitation Facilities, commonly known as INARF to the industry. I'm originally from New Albany, Indiana, and now I reside, during my time at INARF, I reside in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay. How and when did you get into this line of work?
Well, it's interesting you ask. It began in 1967. Actually, prior to going to Indiana University, while I was in high school, I worked for the New Albany Department of Parks and Recreation. And when I started at IU, I was looking for some part-time work, and Rauch Inc., it was formerly called something else, Joseph Rauch School, but it's Rauch Inc. right now. They had a position opening for what you would call adapted PE, but as a recreation leader, because at that time there was no mandatory public education for students with disabilities. And so from the ages of whether it's early childhood programs until adults, there were classroom programs, but they didn't have any recreation time or any adapted PE. And so I was hired to work there for about 20 hours a week. What that developed into is during summertime, I started working in their adult work services program, helping and assisting and supporting individuals complete contract manufacturing work, etc., for local business and industry. So it began in 1967 and then continued until just December of this year, was a lifelong love of working in the industry. Now, some of my other experiences, after I finished college, I worked at New Hope Services in Jeffersonville, Indiana. I worked at Stone Belt Center in Bloomington from 74 to 76. And then I was appointed executive director of New Albany Goodwill Industries, which is now merged, and I think it's Easter Seal Rehabilitation and Goodwill Industries in Clarksville. But anyway, I worked there as their executive director from 76 to 78. In 1978, actually it was October of 78, Costa Miller, the founding chief executive officer of INARF, invited me and kind of recruited me to come to work at INARF, basically to implement a newly found program, a newly created program. It's fairly obscure even to today. It's Indiana State Use Program, which is a program that provides employment and training opportunities for individuals with disabilities. And right now it focuses on people with significant disabilities.
Okay. Well, let's talk about INARF. Some people might not know what INARF does. So can you tell me kind of what the role of INARF is in the state of Indiana, what their purpose is, some of their biggest successes and some of the challenges?
Right. Well, first of all, INARF is a trade association, and it's a membership association much like the Chamber of Commerce is. And its services to its members are providing information, marketing services, consultation, technical assistance, education and training programs, and governmental affairs. And I think probably most people identify with INARF as its effort in the governmental affairs arena. I guess simply put, though, INARF provides leadership and builds and develops resources and promotes quality services among its members for people with disabilities.
Who typically are its members?
Well, INARF began through the network of community-based organizations, typically organizations like local ARCs, the Association for People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, but it wasn't exclusively for those individuals. There were some freestanding rehabilitation centers around the state, such as Easter Seals Crossroads, Tradewinds Rehabilitation Center, the Rehab Center in Jeffersonville, Evansville Association for the Blind, the Rehab Center down in Evansville. So, but anyway, it's generally community-based organizations. But it has evolved to such a point now that because of the larger and a more expanded provider network, you have proprietorships, you have partnerships, you have multi-state corporations, some of which, like ResCare, are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So we have multi-state companies, huge organizations, and we still have our base is community-based organizations.
Okay, and in layman terms, how would you describe what NARF would do for its members? I mean, what would they look to NARF to, once they joined, leadership or support? Talk about
Well,
that.
I guess there's a couple things that you would consider if you were to choose to invest in a trade association. One, information. Nowadays, though, information is so readily available, but it's being able to hear from your colleagues, sharing information between and among the different members, having it back and forth. And I think that information, or having access to information, is a critical element. Having have a seat at the table on behalf of the industry. If you look at really what the hallmark of NARF is, everybody thinks legislative activities. Well, legislative activities are important, but it's the regulatory bodies, the administrative entities, where day in and day out, NARF has a seat at the table representing its members and the industry. And we have a very strong partnership with the ARCA of Indiana. We are very fortunate in Indiana that so many times consumers and families are represented in tandem within our the provider group. Yeah. And so John Dickerson and Costa, John and I, have worked extremely well. And probably, if you look at it throughout, in the context of the larger industry throughout the country, we're envied by many states because of the partnership that exists between the ARC of Indiana and NARF.
Okay, well then that would be one of the successes and one of the ways that Indiana is different than other states.
Correct.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about how Indiana is different than other states?
Well, I mean, first of all, every state human service delivery system, and in this case, the developmental disability service system, is maybe different. For instance, in Indiana right now, there are no state institutions for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. When we closed Fort Wayne State Developmental Center about 2006, I believe it was, that was the last state institution that specialized, I guess, or had residents who were intellectual and developmentally disabled. We also are different in that some states have county systems. Ours are all private systems, not-for-profit and for-profit systems. In Indiana, we probably only have two primary trade associations, even though the ARCA is a consumer advocacy organization, NARF is the trade association for providers of services. Many times in other states like Ohio, there may be a multitude of organizations. It's more fragmented. There may be the association rehab facilities. There may be the county-based organizations. There may be the Association of Goodwills, the ARC. There may be the Ohio Providers Association, these are so that it's not as easy to get on the same page maybe. And again, I said we're fairly fortunate here.
Okay, good. You're doing a good job.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm just nodding my head so that that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm curious about is, has NARF's philosophy over the years changed in terms of supports and services, attitudes towards people with disabilities? I know in the early days, we had day service providers with work activity programs, a lot of sheltered work. Right. And I know that's changed. Can you talk about, in the tenure that you've been involved with NARF, the changes in philosophy?
Yes. I think NARF's philosophy is more an emerging and refinement, if you will. But I think it was about in the mid-'90s when we met by retreat, all the leaders within the industry of NRF, past chairs, maybe CEOs and the board, and we wanted to embrace a set of values and vision for the industry. But I guess the cornerstone of all this was access, choice, and options, access, and choice. And if you don't have options, you wouldn't have choice. And if you didn't have choice, we say, I didn't better need to do that again. Well, options, access, and choice were the 3 points that we can't. That was a takeaway from that strategic retreat, and that is, if you don't have options, you don't have choice. But if you don't have access to options, you have no choice whatsoever. And I guess one of the things that was important to recognize is the fact is that the emerging philosophical shift was more or less informed consumer choice versus a we know best attitude. And that was the bottom line takeaway, I think.
And so how did that filter out? What changes did you see in what was happening for people with disabilities and how agencies were providing that service?
Well, first of all, if I may go back for a second, the context of our industry was that there were a number of laws which govern us, and there was funding mechanisms that provided the resources, and then the organizations that founded them. You had a blend initially in the early times. That was the blend, and you had to juggle that. But that's how you help design and pay for services. What was an emerging added addition, the best addition, was the consumer involvement in the process. And so it wasn't just the federal or state laws, it wasn't just the funding streams, and it wasn't just the governing body and the staff, but the consumer had a role. So that emerging role made a better holistic service delivery system. And I think that was something that NRF helped foster and our members helped foster. And I think it was great that the consumers decided to take an active role in this process. And I don't know if that answered. Okay.
Yeah, that was good.
I lost my train of thought a couple times there.
No, basically, I just wondered how the values of the organization changed.
Yeah. Well, I think the best, easiest, I guess, soundbite would be the informed choice and making that a reality versus the we know best, telling you here's the only option you have. And I think, but then the marketplace changed too, because there were 4 huge laws, I guess, that had a profound impact on the way services were provided from the late 70s until the mid 90s, and those were maybe not. They were started in 1975. The Developmental Disability Civil Rights Act. It was a forerunner to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Then you had the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and its subsequent amendments. Then you had the Education of Handicapped Children Act, renamed Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then, of course, the hallmark legislation in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you look in the context, let's just take the Rehab Act, since everybody is familiar with it. In 1973, that required that persons with disabilities had an individual written rehabilitation plan. It was a forerunner to the person-centered plan. Now it's called the Individual Plan for Employment. Then you had the Education of All Handicapped Children Act of 75. It created the ability to graduate thousands of students with disabilities. And what that meant also was that they had a right to more integrated classroom and educational activities. They had educational planning, individual education plans, and there was choices woven into the fabric of that act. And then, of course, a very small, which nobody realized, it was in the, probably in the last paragraph of the act. It wasn't the last paragraph, but it was way deep in the act, was the created supported employment, the ability for students to transition from school to work to independent living. And that was, so those, little small clauses and a paragraph here and a paragraph there were really some of the forerunners for the way modern day rehabilitation services are planned, designed, and paid for today in the era of Medicaid. You know.
It's really good. We haven't had anyone talk about this particular
Oh.
aspect, so that's really good. I'm probably going to ask you some more questions.
Oh,
about
I don't know if I need to study for that test.
Well, basically, what I'll ask you, and if you don't know, it's fine.
Yeah.
How does Indiana fare with other states in terms of implementing these laws and implementing these new policies?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple things you might, might recognize that in the 90s, when everybody was wrestling with all the different ways to offer services and how to provide services in the community and meet the market demands and the emerging market demands of families and consumers, that it wasn't just one set of services in a facility, but community, they want to be not only integrated in the community, excuse me, but they wanted to ensure that inclusion was a central theme of this whole process. I believe there's a couple things that occurred was that Indiana switched from the developmental model, which was implemented in the facility, to more of a medical model, the Medicaid model, but woven into that was much more choice of program, choice of service provider, choice of who your direct support professionals, people who are providing the supports and services. And so all those things, and it was then a fee for service, and versus a block grant or a money. If you recall, back in the 90s and up till 2001, and actually it was Governor Daniels who was the director of the Office of Management and Budget, to help us get the support services waiver in place. Before that, the Department of Mental Health and its successor, Department of Human Services, and now FSSA, they ran out of money about April of every year. But when you went to the fee for service versus a block grant, I'm going to use a block grant because everybody understands, but a grant for those services for MR services or DD services, what happened basically, you pulled it down on a unit basis, but it wasn't truly a fee for service system. And then once the Medicaid program, it became just like any other insurance program. You walked in, the first thing you had to make sure you're eligible for Medicaid. You showed your card. And then if you had a day service, you got paid for a day. And the federal government would ensure that it would match whatever the state's allotments were. So that occurred under Governor Bush, under President Bush, and back in 2001. But that was a major change. And I see we're going to evolve into possibly a managed care program in the future. I don't know when it's going to happen, but they're all kind of pilot programs approved by the Centers for Medicare and Medicare Services, CMS, right now. And that's allowing managed care programs outside typical healthcare services.
Okay. Are there areas that you think Indiana does especially well in, or areas where they face some challenges?
Mm-hmm. Well, they've done it particularly well in a couple of things. One, employment. Let's look at it.
We need to say Indiana, because they're not going to hear me ask you.
Oh, that.
Indiana. So Indiana has done especially well.
Okay. The service system in Indiana has done exceedingly well in three areas. One, employment. And in fact, in the mid 80s, 1986, when Kelly Wagner and Governor Orr was there, it was sponsored by the Governor's Planning Council, by Department of Education, Department of Workforce Development, and Indiana Rehab Services joint grants to create the supported employment service system, the beginning, the infancy of that. So early in front, between, say, 86 and 93, Indiana got ahead of the curve. Now, it has lagged behind in recent times because there hasn't been the same resource emphasis on employment of people with significant disabilities, as maybe some other states, but we've still had, because of those early times, everybody has adopted that model, and there's been an investment to some extent in that model. And so no one else did that back in the mid-'80s. There were maybe isolated areas where there were special grants from, like Tom Bellamy had some support employment grants in Oregon. David Mank's been always ahead of the game wherever he was. But of course, when he came to Indiana, he brought with us the priority on towards employment. Indiana was very good on working initially to set up the ICF-IDD system. I know it's a small group home system, whereas other states, Indiana kept the number of residents from 8 or less. In other states, maybe had from 8 to 16. But now the Indiana also is behind the whole the nation in terms of having too many out-of-home placements. I think we had about 50% of our persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities and living in Medicaid waiver sites, group homes, and our prior to 2005 in private or state-operated DD centers.
Good. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about lobbying.
Okay.
And basically, I'm not sure if you personally did a lot of lobbying or not, but if NRF does lobbying and what NRF's role is with lobbying. So if you could tell me about the experience of lobbying, what legislators worked with, how you work to make things successful.
Well, one of the most valued services that NRF provides to its members, and I think to the industry in large, even because I always kind of think that even if you're not a member, you got a piece of the insurance, a little bit of coverage there. But NRF has long been recognized ever since it was started in '74 when it had its first paid staff, Costa. It had a strong presence in governmental affairs. Costa made that happen. He not only wanted a seat at the table, he ensured that NRF members had a reservation at the table. And if you think in terms of who's the guy who does Chris Matthews, the author of Now Let Me Tell You What I Really Think and Hardball. He had a seat at the table because of his key staffer. He was chief of staff for Tip O'Neill. But if you're at the table, number one, familiarity between buyer and seller always helps the seller. Secondly, you know what the issues are. You know what your members are. You're able to articulate that message. And then you're looked to as a resource for that information. Well, transfer that from a regulatory or administrative entity, and you get to the point in the General Assembly. Well, I think the Indiana General Assembly, we hired our first lobbyist in 1982. Before that was just Costa. But what we have, I think, what we have perfected from 1982 until right now through 2012 is that, number one, a strong grassroots mechanism whereby all of our members invite legislators in. We have a strong governmental affairs platform. We discuss the key issues with the legislators, the leaders, not only the leaders of both parties, but the key appropriations, ways and means, and we have individual one-on-one sessions, both in their home areas as well as in the halls of the State House. I think secondly, what the legislators rely on NRF is that what we've told them is accurate. And when you have that two-way trust between and among the key leaders, you're going to have an opportunity to share what your stories are, number one, and secondly, to influence what the decisions are. Now, disability politics, is not Republican or Democrats. It's really nonpartisan. But you still have to be recognized as someone who's reliable and trustworthy and truthful. And I think NR brought that to the table through Costa, and I tried to carry that out these last 8 years. Another thing is that what we've done was we've always supported the summer study committees. In the past, I guess back in the 80s and 90s, I didn't think there was the same utilization of interim study commissions, like the DD Study Commission you may be familiar with, but there's the Autism Study Commission, there's the Medicaid Oversight Study Commission. So almost everything has a study commission. That's where the opportunity is to really discuss, explore, share, and make public various positions on potential pieces of legislation or getting legislation drafted and introduced during the following session. NRF has always been vitally involved in the summer study sessions, if you will. Primarily the DD Commission, but the Commerce Commission. I can just name a number of different study commissions. And so and then finally we recognize the fact that it does cost money to run an election. And in 2006, NRF created its own political action committee, the NRF PAC. It's an LLC, so it's one of the 3 corporations. And as a result, we were able to get our members to invest in, and it's as a complementary piece, to pool their money, if you will, so we could write small checks to legislators, the leaders, people who supported the industry, supported families and people with disabilities, and they understood that we needed a rational business environment in which to provide services.
Rattles it off. See, I told you this would be easy.
I haven't had a chance to look and see if I've made everything.
Take a look then.
Okay. Out of my good. What's your next question? Oh, you asked me about certification of rehab facilities. I know that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about cost in this.
Okay.
Or if you'd like, I can save that for last if you'd rather.
There's some career highlights. Maybe that can be with Costa too.
Okay, yeah, this is just a guide, so however you want to talk about these things.
Well, I think there's one thing we need to talk about in the context of the most monumental piece of state legislation was the 317 report.
And talk about that now?
Well, I mean, I think if we maybe you can start with Costa, and because he really introduced Senate Bill 317 that helped set the stage for the 317 report, having the commission in place, and then
All right. Well, did that work, or do you want to start out?
Let's do it again.
Okay. So I know that you are a longtime friend. I know Costa was a mentor. I know you have a long time relationship with Costa. So who better to talk about Costa than you? So I'd really like to hear some thoughts that you have about Costa. What his legacy to the state of Indiana was, what people remember about him, the impact he had on people with disabilities and on Indiana history.
Well, first of all, Costa was one of the most passionate individuals you would ever meet. I mean, there was only black or white. It was not gray. Beyond God and family, he loved this industry that he invested so heavily in. He would put everybody on his back if he had to, and he'd protect them from harm's way. He was that type of person. You may consider Patton a wartime general and Omar Bradley a peacetime general. Well, Costa, in my opinion, you wouldn't want any better person, any better leader to lead you into an adverse situation, because I'm sure that he would bring the resources to bear that would prevail. And that's, I think, whether it's the Medicaid wars of the early 90s with Jim Verdier or whatever, Costa was always there for the industry. What people didn't realize was that his uncompromising love and support for people who the most vulnerable citizens were, and primarily the individuals, whether they were of color or whether or not they were people with significant disabilities. He wanted to ensure nobody would mistreat them and that they would be given every opportunity to succeed. And I think he said that so many times and over. He was on the president's, he was appointed as Justin Dart's vice chair of the President's Committee of Employment of People with Disabilities. He lived a life like that. He created the Office of Consumer Affairs Initiatives within NR for a period of time. He served on as president of the Governor's Planning Council for People with Disabilities for many years. And so he embodied not only this value, but he implemented it in his lifelong work. I think Costa should, and I think John Dickerson, who he and John worked tremendously well together. I mentioned that earlier, but I think you would find Costa worked to ensure that the Senate Bill 317, I think it was in the 97 legislature, was enacted, and that created the 317 Commission, which wrote a plan, which became part of the 317 plan, which basically changed the way and manner in which services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were planned, designed, and paid for. And it took money and invested in the service delivery system that helped set the stage for modernized services in the 21st century. Kathy Davis was the chair, and she was also the head of the Family and Social Services Administration. Obviously, she became state budget director and lieutenant governor of the state under Joe Kernan's administration. But anyway, that was a hallmark. I mean, that was a centerpiece that should not be forgotten by anyone. And the report has application in today's world.
Good. So, do you have any personal Costa stories? Do you have some ways that you would describe them? They can be funny stories, they can be work-related stories.
I have to think about those right now. I mean, I could.
Can we skip that?
Yeah, let me come back to that.
Okay.
Let me think.
Are there some things, projects, work? I know you said the 317. Would there be other projects that Costa would be most proud of?
Well, yes, I think he died before the last State Developmental Center was closed, but he and John Dickerson and some key people within the Family and Social Services Administration helped to close Newcastle and Muscatatuck State Hospital, and he really believed that everyone should be in the community. I think he also was very proud of the way the state youth program has grown from just an idea in '74, and I think that was NR's first legislative success because that was passed in 1976, and Costa was only in Indiana for 2 years at the time, but that created an opportunity for the state of Indiana to contract with local rehabilitation facilities and buy products and services that were either produced or provided by them. And the program's a $10 million program today. And approximately 1,500 to 2,000 people work annually, at least part-time or at least by 1 hour a year, through that program.
That's good. Are there any other than coming back to some stories later, are there any other thoughts that you have about Costa? What people in the general, people that didn't know him as well but knew of his work, or things they might say about him? Because we do want to have a little blurb about Costa. So just anything you can think of to add to that would be good. And hopefully we'll get some pictures from you of different things, that you might have.
Yeah, I do have something. I didn't bring any pictures. I guess when we had the march on the State House during the Medicaid crisis in the early 90s, I mean, Costa was up there waving his hand, in his own inimitable way, and calling on the Bayh administration to not close group homes and to fund them the way they should be so that people could live in a smaller setting. And I mean, I'm telling you, he stood up there and railed against this administration. And, I mean, against the Governor By's administration and Jim Verdier in particular, who was the director of the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning at the time. I mean, and that epitomized his fierceness of his commitment, you know. But yet he wouldn't back away, even if he thought he would be ostracized or chastised or being removed from the seats at the table. And then he was such a loving guy too. I mean, it was as much as he could get upset with the director of the Division of Disability and Rehab Services, or the secretary of FSSA, or the head of the Marine Greer, who was after he just railed against them and just took them to task for some inept. He would say, "Jim, go and buy them some flowers," and you can't do that in this day. Go and buy them some flowers and go and make peace with them, because he really had a soft side. But at the time he could get so excited and so agitated, that he wasn't going to let someone intimidate him. In fact, his preference was to intimidate them.
He was an intimidating force.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a story you want, but
No, that's good. That was very good. Okay, so in terms of the field of disability, in terms of human services, from your perspective, what areas have you seen the most significant changes occur, and how? What are some of the biggest changes in Indiana? And you may have said some of these before, but if you could just...
Well, when I started in the industry, and when Costa began NARF in '74, I think we had a $22 or $24 million total budget. That was the resources that were committed to agencies that provided services. There were no purchase of services agreements to speak of with vocational rehabilitation. And, it was mostly bake sales, cakewalks, United Ways, and whatever local fundraising to have these day programs. Currently, fast forward to 2012, we got a $1 billion industry. And a $1 billion industry, well, I mean, it's a seismic shift. And if you look at the Medicaid waiver program, which is really the modern day program of the way most consumers and families like services planned and designed and provided, that's $500 million. And you have another $350 million for the group home service system. You have money for employment and VR, another $80 million. You cobble all that together and you got a $1 billion industry. And that's a remarkable change. And Indiana, probably on a per capita basis, is way ahead of its counterparts in other states. Another thing I think in the context of today's world is Indiana is only one of 8 states that has a surplus. Now, that's good and bad. It's good because it's about time that we have the paybacks begin, because we endured 7% cuts in 2009 in the waiver program, 3% in group homes, 10% in vocational rehabilitation. And so when will the time be right to get our money back and to invest in the future? So I think you're going to see, since the state has about a $2 billion surplus right now, even though that's total money, not the money they owe for other bills, but $2 billion are in the coffers, and we're only one of 8 states. I think this year the human service delivery system, especially the DD system, should be able to get another investment of dollars and cents and of resources.
And where do you see those dollars going to? New service delivery systems, to existing service delivery?
Well, I don't know if there's going to be new services as such as to shore up exactly some of the existing services. But I think you're going to have a greater use of technology, not only in just video monitoring, but I'm talking about employment and employment-related activities, such as increasing an individual's productivity. I think there's going to be a use of smart homes, and I think you're going to find that there's going to have to be shared staff in the future. But I think there's going to be healthcare coordination will be a new investment of resources. Having non-goal directed support and services, like I think they call it the participant. That's the new PAC services. I'm blocking on the acronym, but anyway. So I think there are some new services which will help improve the service delivery system, and they'll be paid for with this new investment. And then, of course, managed care. What will the impact of managed care be? But right now, I think healthcare coordination and transportation, those are two that have to be funded better, and I think this administration will be funding them, and I think so that augurs well for the next 2 to 4 years.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see. So, do you feel like there were a lot of differences for NR and I guess we can look at it more broadly, services for people with disabilities with the different administrations?
Oh, well, typically, if you look at the two major political parties, Republican and Democratic parties, and you look at their platforms, whether it's a national platform, their state platforms, most people feel that social services should be in a better position with the Democrats. But it hasn't worked out that way in Indiana. The biggest gains ever made by this industry were during Otis Bowen's and Bob Orr's administration in the 80s, and then under Mitch Daniels' administration, which is just finishing up. But I think part of that was because there's been an effort to change the model in each of those times, and there's been adequate resources. The economy was good. You know, we had a terrible time in the 90s, early 90s. We had a terrible time in the early 80s, but in the late 80s, you know, economic times, there was a robust time, and we had it until just the downturn in 2008. We had a robust time in the early 21st century. You know, so I mean, you have to look at a whole lot of factors, but I think we have done well with the Republicans in state government, but we haven't taken a back seat with the Democrats. It's just that so many times there were other factors beyond their control. I guess what the outlook right now is that for Governor Pence is that we should be positioned well because his roadmap for Indiana incorporates some of the things that we value ourselves. Number one, he believes in keeping individuals in the homes where possible. And so the family support waiver, the new waiver that's replacing the DD, Developmental Disabilities Services waiver, that will do what it can to keep people in the homes. The family support waiver also will give a few dollars more towards individuals and families, not only for day programs, but again, to help families who need it. I think, let me take a break here.
That's good.
Okay.
You need a drink of water?
Yeah, I was going to have a drink of water. I was getting ready to cough again. But I need to talk about that a little bit more, but I didn't make a lot of notes, but it's the CIH. I used it wrong. The state of Indiana has created two new waivers. The Community Integration Habilitation, replacing the DD waiver because that was wrong before. And then the Family Support Waiver, which replaced the Support Services Waiver. And the idea behind that is to eliminate the wait list. And it is intended to give as many families a little bit of something to provide for supports and services, whether it's day services, respite, in-home services, versus the individual DD waiver, having a long wait list for people to get the platinum card or the gold card to have 24/7 services. And so the community integration and habilitation waiver is now based on need alone. So
That's good.
that's still technical though.
No, I mean, good information, and that's going to be the challenge, is how we get it all out there, and for people that want to know about certain things and do that. All right, do you want to talk about certification of rehab agencies?
Oh,
Was
yes.
Was that a good question? Okay.
Yeah, that was one of your questions. That's a good topic. NARF, like many of its other allied organizations, were always committed to professional accreditation or certification. We just didn't believe people should be able to hang a shingle up unless they met minimum standards. In the late 80s, there were 3 independent state agencies that were certifying community organizations. Indiana Rehabilitation Services, which was the forerunner to, which housed vocational rehabilitation, Department of Education, and the Department of Mental Health. And they were running around the state constantly surveying early intervention programs, day service programs, and then employment programs. What NARF proposed that they merge these together into a set of unified standards. And so there was one set of unified standards. And the state agency were applying, they had teams to go out, but you had to be accredited to do business with the state. So we were very pleased with that. However, as changes occurred, and we realized that kind of it could be an incestuous arrangement, people in the state surveying individuals, and we thought maybe an independent third-party national accreditation program was preferable. And so we helped close out the unified standards, the state agency doing its own accreditation reviews, and we adopted the position that at that time CARF should be the one. Now there's one of maybe 4, 5, or 6 national accrediting bodies that can be utilized for accreditation purposes. But CARF, CARF, which stands for the Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities, but it goes by CARF more than the long name. It's there in the Council of Quality is another one, the National Accreditation Council, and then some people even use ISO 9002 human service standards as their accrediting group. So, but I think Indiana's in better shape, and the legislature looked at it and endorsed it right now. So, to be an employment service provider, you have to do that. To be a residential provider, a day service provider, and it's like having a good housekeeping seal of approval, in my opinion.
I remember going through several CARF evaluations, and the joke was always the wet ink.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. That's right, you probably got those years.
Went through several.
I don't know, let's see if there's anything else.
But,
If there's,
in terms of CARF.
I just think of just 3 options. Yeah, I was trying to think of your questions here.
Well, I'm still going to talk to you about looking forward and that sort of thing, and career highlights.
Okay. Oh, yeah, career highlights.
So I wanted to talk to you about in looking forward, what do you hope for in terms of supports and services to promote meaningful lives?
Well, I believe as we change the model of service delivery from a medical model to a lifespan model, I think that it won't be just an element of where a person is at that time. That'll be the focal point of his or her individual service plan or their person-centered plan. I believe planning has to be more comprehensive and more futuristic, and you have to ensure that that it's not just the service providers that participate, friends, family, state agency folks, and I think you have to really have a living document. The person-centered plan has to be that. I think most importantly, a wiser and better use of technology. Technology is critical to the future of services and supports. If, in fact, everyone right now who is being who is living at their home needed 24/7, the system may or may not be able to respond to it. So having individuals, having video monitoring is one aspect, having a well-trained direct support professional service group, and having upward mobility opportunities and in-service and pre-service training. All these things will help with improving quality services and ensure that individuals won't have to rely on one-on-one 24/7. Shared staff, so doing it smarter, better, like that, and quicker, and really cheaper. And the only way you can do that is having technology at the forefront, I think.
Okay, now, explain to me how technology will improve that.
Okay.
You know, what you're meaning by that. Just
Well,
a little more clear.
and this is going to get into some area which I'm not an expert in technology.
just
Let's say
your
a smart
opinion.
smart home. Okay. If in fact there are sensors within the home and an individual is in a sleep time mode and they get up and leave their bedroom, not their restroom, but their bedroom, if something goes off, maybe an attendant can focus in through a webcam, web-based cam, or maybe someone could say, I better go over and check on Johnny or Jerry. You know, if in fact they're cooking on the stove and sensors for heat, that'd be a health and safety issue. If in fact an individual is working and they don't need a job coach one-on-one, but they need a teleprompter, or they may need some sort of auditory cue, you know, I think those things would help individuals, and you wouldn't have to worry about having a one-on-one support service staff there, but they can be monitored. You might be able to monitor 5 or 6 or 7 people in a given setting. Then record keeping and retention and things of this nature, being able to, instead of writing pencil and paper notes and having those, then having weekly summaries and monthly summaries, but having it all being able to be dumped in and focusing on what the plan is, not just isolated situations. And then if you have all this aggregated data, then you can look at trends, good trends and bad trends. How can we improve quality outcomes? So, I mean, I think the future of technology, and I just don't know enough about true technology other than tell you what I see the potential future is, you know.
That was a good explanation, because some people associate just the word technology with, obviously, meaning giving everyone an iPad
Oh, yeah.
or a computer. So that's, what I was looking for.
Okay, well, if I would have had a chance to think about it, I could probably come up with some other good.
But those were really good. because
Okay.
That's, it's people that are going to see this aren't going to even really know necessarily what specifically we were talking about or what led to that conversation.
Okay.
So.
Well, if I need to do any filming over, if you want me to be focusing on something at some point in time, just call me up and so I can be prepared, because I just stay with these answers. Okay.
No, this is great. This is exactly what, we want. And that's why I ask you those other questions, just so someone who doesn't know what we're talking about will think, okay, is he talking about iPads?
Yeah.
He's talking about sensors, so that when you get out of bed,
Yes.
there's a little beep.
Yeah.
So that's that.
But you can see how the economies of scale would work if, let's say, in a duplex, and I'm saying duplex, even though it could be a multi-family apartment living, but you have individual apartments, but you only have one attendant for 4 individuals possibly. That's a shared staff. Because if you had in the past, if you have individuals sitting, and we can't really afford that, but you have to have Jenny on Jim, and it's just that you can't do that. You don't have the luxury of having that.
That was good. So are there places currently, I think there are there places currently that are using smart homes in Indiana?
Oh, yes, there are.
Hang on, you can tell me when you go.
I was looking for something. I thought I had it, but I don't have it. I didn't bring any I was going to bring a residential discussion piece, but I didn't do it. I was looking 1, 2, 3, 7. No, I guess I didn't bring it. I'm sorry. I was going to bring about the smart homes.
Well, you can just tell us what you know.
Yeah.
Are there smart homes in Indiana? Indiana?
Yes, to some extent. There are video monitoring systems in place. There are three distinct types, and then there are some homes which have been equipped. And I think the programs for it's for people with really significant behavioral needs have some smart homes, and there are about 54. There are 14 homes around the state that have some features that are equipped with like a smart home or have certain aspects.
Okay, good.
The extensive support needs homes, I think, have incorporated a lot of the smart home technology. Some people call them hard homes, but they're smart homes. So people can't break walls down and, they have acting out issues.
Okay, so besides the technology with smart homes, what do you see as foreseeable future trends in terms of providing services and supports? Like, what's the next step for providing quality of life for people with disabilities, making it better and keeping it?
Well, I think there are two or three things. One, for health and health-related activities, we need to do a better job with prevention, whether it's having cancer screening tests, better dental hygiene. Most of the times, an individual who is residing in our service delivery system, they go to the emergency room. Everybody has to, because they don't want to take a chance that there'd be a problem. If we can invest the same in healthcare prevention and prevention activities and in healthcare coordination, you can eliminate costly primary physician's care and costly emergency room runs that not only is a drain on the system, but also doesn't help the individual. That's one area. I think the future also of having a well-trained direct support professional workforce, having pre-service, in-service training, and a multitude of services, and having career opportunities and career advancement that'll have better retention rates within the organizations and have better recruitment opportunities, and therefore I think you have better quality outcomes.
What does the training and education look like? If you had the resources and you could direct it, what do you think new people coming into the field, what kind of training should they have, and what sort of education should they have to do good work?
Well, I mean, you don't need a 4-year college degree for this, but I think we should work with our vocational technical schools, including Ivy Techs, to develop a curriculum that's specialized and designed, and work with our 4-year institutions as well, so that once you get the direct service core curriculum completed and you meet the minimum standards, then if you have management aspirations, you'll be able to slot and go right into a business administration curriculum or work through the School of Education, because there are certain because paraprofessionals and professionals, education-related activities would be a natural. I think that the component is important, but I think it's been an emerging and area of interest, but there's not really a core degree program, as far as I know, in most colleges in most Indiana 4-year institutions. Like if you look in the home health arena, you'll have home nursing assistants, and you have the certified nursing assistants CNA program. We need to have similar type programs and certification programs, whether you do it online or whether you do it face to face, supported by mentoring and internships, etc. I think that'll all help out, and then people feel good about the career, feel good about the job they're doing, and not feel it's a dead-end street.
Good. All right, now then the last question I have, and then we're going to just chat. is
That's where we get some of the really good stuff.
Yeah.
is career highlights. If you want to talk about some of the things that you're most proud of, some of the things that were most challenging, but you muscled through it.
Hmm. Well, I guess looking career highlights, I have a lot. First of all, I was fortunate enough after I finished student teaching to be offered a position in this field because I certainly didn't go to school thinking that I was going to be an association executive or association manager. Most people don't. But I guess the career highlight of mine was being appointed Chief Executive Officer, President Chief Executive Officer of NARF in 2004 after Kostas' untimely death. My goal at that time, because everybody, I wanted to ensure that our members, I wanted to ensure that they had the confidence in me, and that I wanted to preserve the core and stimulate progress, and that was critical to the success early in my term as presidency, as president of NARF. And I think I was able to do that. I wanted to make sure, I wanted to cast aside the notion that it was a good old boy institution and ensure that it was more inclusive. Everybody had a seat at the table. I had an opportunity to get out of Indianapolis, to get away from the Beltway mentality, the I-465, be with our members, find out what our members wanted and what they wanted from NARF and how they wanted our services to meet their individual community needs. And so I think these last years were great. What I also was proud about, going back, is that we were able to put together the first pooled loan program, a tax-exempt financing for our members in 1992. I was responsible for those business services, and so NARF offered that to its members. And at that time, and the banks were not, they were not consolidated banks. Almost everybody had a county or community bank, and they were charging our members double-digit interest rates. And so we put together a pooled loan program where we combined the borrowings of about 17 of our members and borrowed $21 million for about 5% interest. And, just like other not-for-profits do, it was tax-exempt financing. I also was pleased with the fact that the state youth program, not only I was hired to get it started, but we helped modernize it by a couple of legislative changes, and so that program continues to run exceedingly well. I think ensuring that the lay of the land, the environment, was economically, it was one that would support a rational business model, and we did get increases for services for 3 consecutive years during Governor Daniels' first 4 years in office. So we felt good about that. I think being able to recruit and retain a good working staff at NARF, that was enabled me to do what our board wanted us to do. And so we had good quality staff and good volunteer leadership. If you look at your board of directors, your volunteer leaders, that's volunteer capital. They're investing in you in the service system versus doing something else with their discretionary time. Let me take a break here. Oh, I think also continuing a good, strong working relationship with John Dickerson, the ARCA of Indiana, and other allied organizations like the Indiana Council of Community Mental Health Centers, the Indiana Association for Community Economic Development. One thing I think that our members were able to do in Indiana versus not too many other states, typical DD centers did, were getting involved in affordable housing issues, not only home ownership issues, but being able to offer multifamily housing, affordable, decent quality, affordable housing, and about a third of our members are players, developments, either developers and are providing essential social services to residents of these affordable housing units throughout the state of Indiana.
Produced by Center on Aging and Community, Indiana Institute on Disability and Community, Indiana University. Funded in part by a grant from the Indiana Governor's Council for People with Disabilities. Copyright 2017, the Trustees of Indiana University.